The auction block reeked of desperation and broken dreams. Commander Jake Morrison stood in the shadows of the slave market, his military uniform hidden beneath a worn trader's cloak. His jaw clenched as he watched the auctioneer drag a young woman forward, her wrists bound in energy shackles that hummed with alien technology. The woman's silver hair marked her as Celestian royalty, though the bidders saw only another exotic prize. Her emerald eyes held no defeat, only carefully controlled fury that reminded Jake of caged lightning. The auctioneer's voice boomed across the crowded platform, describing her lineage like livestock breeding notes. Jake's hand moved to his concealed weapon as the bidding escalated. 3 different cartel bosses raised their offers, each more grotesque than the last. The Celestian woman straightened her shoulders despite the humiliation, her chin lifted in defiance that spoke of royal blood refusing to bow. 500,000 credits, called a Vorthan crime lord whose tentacles writhed with excitement. The woman's eyes swept the crowd and locked onto Jake's position. For a heartbeat, their gazes met through the chaos. She tilted her head slightly, a gesture so subtle that only someone trained in royal protocol would recognize it as a plea for intervention. Jake stepped from the shadows. 1 million credits. The auction hall fell silent. The auctioneer's cybernetic eye whirred as it focused on this unexpected bidder. The crime lords turned to study Jake with predatory interest, their bodyguards shifting positions like wolves circling prey. You have the credits to back that bid, human? The auctioneer's voice carried skepticism and barely concealed greed. Jake produced a credit chip that gleamed under the harsh lights. Verified funds. Complete the transaction. The Celestian woman watched him with new interest, her tactical mind clearly analyzing this development. The energy shackles deactivated with a soft chime as ownership transferred. Jake approached the platform, his movements deliberate and controlled. You just made enemies of half the galaxy's criminal networks, she said as he handed her a cloak to cover her torn garments. Wouldn't be the first time. Jake guided her toward the exit, his eyes scanning for threats. Name's Jake Morrison. What do I call you? I am Princess Elena Starweaver of the Celestian Empire. Her voice carried the quiet authority of someone born to rule. And you just purchased the most dangerous woman in known space. 3 hover vehicles roared to life as they reached the market's exit. Jake cursed under his breath. The crime lords hadn't accepted their loss gracefully. Blaster fire erupted from the vehicles, sending traders diving for cover behind market stalls. Elena moved with fluid grace despite her weakened state, following Jake's lead as they sprinted through the maze of vendor booths. Her royal training showed in every calculated step, even as exhaustion from months of captivity threatened to slow her down. This way, Jake called, leading her toward a concealed speeder bike. The engine hummed to life as more shots rang out behind them. Elena climbed on without hesitation, trusting this stranger who had paid a fortune for her freedom. The speeder launched into traffic as pursuit vehicles gave chase. Jake weaved between transport ships with precision that spoke of military pilot training. Elena gripped his shoulders, her touch steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Why? She asked as they cleared the market district. Why spend everything to save someone you don't know? Jake banked hard around a cargo hauler. Because nobody deserves that fate, royal or not. Elena studied his profile as he navigated the crowded skyways. Something about his answer resonated with truth she hadn't heard in months of captivity. This human had risked his life and fortune based purely on principle. Where are we going? She asked. Somewhere safe. Then we discuss your future. Jake's tone remained calm despite the adrenaline coursing through both of them. Elena's mind raced with possibilities. Her empire lay in ruins, her family scattered or dead. This human offered something she hadn't dared hope for since her capture, a chance to rebuild. But first, she would need to become strong enough to reclaim what was rightfully hers. The pursuit vehicles fell back as Jake guided them into the lower city levels where his kind of justice held more sway than criminal credits. Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. This stranger had given her more than freedom. He had given her the possibility of revenge against those who had destroyed her world. But revenge would require strength she no longer possessed. Months of captivity had weakened her body and tested her spirit. If she was going to reclaim her throne and restore her people, she would need more than royal blood. She would need to become a warrior worthy of her heritage. Jake Morrison had saved her life. Now she would ask him to help forge her into the weapon her empire needed. Jake's safe house occupied the entire top floor of an abandoned manufacturing complex. The elevator climbed through layers of rust and decay before opening into a space that defied expectations. Training equipment lined one wall while weapon racks filled another. Combat mats covered the floor, their surfaces worn smooth by countless hours of practice. Elena stepped into the center of the room and turned slowly, taking inventory of everything she saw. Her royal education had included military strategy, but theory differed vastly from the practical tools surrounding her now. Each piece of equipment told a story of discipline and dedication that impressed her, despite her exhaustion. "You're military," she observed, noting the organization and functionality of every item. "Former special operations. Now I help people who need help." Jake activated security systems that hummed to life around the perimeter. "You can rest tonight. Tomorrow we start your rehabilitation." Elena shook her head. "I don't need rest. I need strength." Jake studied her with the careful attention of someone who understood the difference between determination and desperation. Her hands trembled slightly from malnutrition, and her stance revealed muscle weakness from forced inactivity. But her eyes burned with purpose that reminded him why he had risked everything at the auction. Strength comes from smart training, not pushing through exhaustion. He gestured toward a small apartment area separated from the main training space. "Food, shower, sleep. We begin properly in the morning." Elena's jaw tightened. "My people are dying while their enemies grow stronger. Every moment I waste makes their suffering worse. And every mistake you make because you're too tired to think clearly makes their situation hopeless." Jake's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded troops in impossible situations. A princess who gets herself killed trying to prove something serves no one. The words hit harder than Elena expected. Her royal pride bristled at being lectured by someone who had never worn a crown. But beneath the anger lay recognition of truth she didn't want to acknowledge. Months of captivity had left her physically and emotionally depleted. "How long?" she asked. "Depends on how badly you want it." Jake moved to a wall display showing training progressions and skill assessments. Basic conditioning takes weeks. Combat proficiency takes months. The kind of capability you'll need to face the forces that destroyed your empire takes years. Elena stared at the progression charts with growing understanding of the mountain she needed to climb. Her enemies controlled fleets of warships and commanded armies of professional soldiers. She possessed royal authority that meant nothing without the power to enforce it. Then we have no time to waste. She moved toward the combat mats despite Jake's instruction to rest. "Show me what I need to learn." Jake caught her arm gently but firmly. "First lesson. Discipline beats desperation every time. A smart warrior knows when to fight and when to prepare." Elena met his gaze with the full weight of royal authority she had inherited. For a moment the warehouse fell silent as two strong wills measured each other. Then Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly. This human had already proven his judgment by saving her life when logic suggested otherwise. "You'll train me to fight?" she asked. "I'll train you to win." Jake released her arm and stepped back. "But that means doing this my way, on my timeline. No shortcuts, no exceptions." Elena nodded slowly. The promise in his words carried the ring of truth that cut through her impatience. This man understood warfare in ways her royal education had never taught. If he could transform her into the weapon her empire needed, she would submit to his instruction. "What happens after the training?" she asked. Jake's expression hardened slightly. "After you're ready, we take back your throne." The simple statement hung in the air between them like a sacred oath. Elena felt something shift inside her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced since before her capture. For the first time in months, the impossible seemed achievable. She studied Jake's face for any hint of false promise or misguided optimism. Instead, she found the quiet confidence of someone who had accomplished the impossible before. This human had already defied logic by purchasing her freedom. Now he offered something far more valuable. the chance to transform her rage into power. Why would you help me reclaim a throne in a galaxy that sees humans as second-class citizens? She asked. Jake moved to the window overlooking the sprawling city below. Because sometimes the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. Elena joined him at the window, studying his reflection in the glass. This man had already sacrificed his fortune and safety for a stranger's freedom. Now he offered to risk his life helping her wage war against impossible odds. The gesture spoke of character that impressed her despite her royal skepticism. I accept your terms, she said. Dawn brought Elena's first real taste of Jake's training methodology. He woke her before sunrise with a simple shake of her shoulder. No words exchanged as they moved to the training area. Her body protested every movement, months of forced inactivity having stolen the physical grace she had once taken for granted. We start with basics, Jake announced, handing her a cup of protein-rich liquid that tasted medicinal but flooded her system with energy. Strength, endurance, flexibility, everything builds from there. Elena drained the cup and set it aside with determination that masked her nervousness. Her royal education had included ceremonial combat training, but nothing approaching the intensity she sensed coming. Jake moved with the fluid precision of someone whose body had become a perfectly calibrated weapon. Ready? He asked. Elena nodded, though she felt anything but ready. Jake began with simple exercises that revealed the shocking extent of her physical deterioration. Push-ups left her arms shaking after 12 repetitions. Running in place brought her heart rate to dangerous levels within minutes. The humiliation burned worse than the physical strain. Stop! Jake's command cut through her determination to push beyond her limits. This isn't about proving toughness. It's about building a foundation. Elena straightened slowly, sweat already beading on her forehead from what should have been elementary movement. I'm stronger than this. You were stronger than this. Jake's correction carried no judgment, only factual assessment. Strength isn't permanent. It requires constant maintenance and careful rebuilding after trauma. The observation stung because it applied to more than just physical capability. Her confidence, authority, and sense of purpose had all deteriorated during captivity alongside her muscle mass and cardiovascular health. Rebuilding her body would only be the beginning of reclaiming who she had been. Jake guided her through modified versions of basic exercises, adjusting intensity to match her current capabilities rather than her former strength. His patience impressed her despite her frustration with her own limitations. Most military instructors would have pushed harder or shown disappointment with such poor initial performance. "Why are you being gentle with me?" she asked during a brief rest period. "I'm not being gentle. I'm being smart." Jake demonstrated a complex defensive movement with graceful efficiency. Injury sets back progress by weeks. Exhaustion prevents learning. Pushing too hard too fast guarantees failure. Elena watched him move through the sequence again, noting how each motion flowed into the next with mathematical precision. His approach to training reflected the same calculating intelligence that had guided his decision to purchase her freedom. Everything served a larger purpose she was beginning to understand. "Show me that sequence," she said. Jake shook his head. Not ready for that level of complexity. Master the fundamentals first. Elena's royal pride bristled again at being told she wasn't ready for something. But her rational mind acknowledged the wisdom in his approach. Attempting advanced techniques before mastering basic movements would only reinforce bad habits and increase injury risk. "How long before I can learn real combat techniques?" she asked. "Depends entirely on how well you absorb the lessons I'm teaching now." Jake returned to monitoring her form as she resumed basic exercises. Rushing the process guarantees you'll hit a plateau later. Elena focused on perfecting each repetition rather than increasing quantity. Her competitive nature wanted to push harder and faster, but Jake's steady guidance kept her anchored to smart progression. Gradually, she began to appreciate the careful balance he maintained between challenge and achievability. The morning session ended with stretching exercises that targeted muscle groups Elena hadn't used in months. Jake's hands guided her positioning with professional detachment, adjusting angles to maximize effectiveness while maintaining appropriate boundaries. His touch remained clinical and respectful despite the intimate nature of physical rehabilitation. "Tomorrow we add complexity," he announced as they finished cooling down. Elena nodded, already anticipating the challenges ahead. Her body ached in ways that reminded her of childhood training sessions with royal tutors who had demanded excellence in everything. But this pain felt different, purposeful rather than punitive. Every sore muscle represented progress toward the strength she would need to reclaim her birthright. 3 weeks into her training, Elena's body began to remember what strength felt like. Her morning exercises no longer left her gasping for breath, and her endurance during afternoon sessions improved steadily. Jake introduced weapon handling with the same methodical patience he had shown during basic conditioning, starting with weighted training implements before progressing to actual combat tools. Weapon mastery begins with respect, he explained as she examined her first real blade. This isn't a tool for intimidation or ceremony. It's an extension of your body and your will. Elena hefted the sword with growing appreciation for its balance and craftsmanship. The weight felt substantial but manageable in her strengthening grip. Jake had selected the weapon specifically for her height and reach, demonstrating the attention to detail that characterized all his instruction. "How many weapons will I need to master?" she asked. "All of them." Jake's answer carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Your enemies won't limit themselves to single combat styles, neither can you." The response both thrilled and intimidated Elena. She had assumed her training would focus on one preferred weapon system with perhaps basic familiarity with others. Jake's comprehensive approach suggested a level of mastery that would require years to achieve. "Start with the basics," he continued, demonstrating proper grip and stance. "Every advanced technique builds from these fundamentals." Elena mirrored his positioning, making minute adjustments as he corrected her form. The movements felt awkward initially, her muscle memory fighting against new patterns, but gradually, her body began to adapt to the weapon's requirements, finding natural rhythm in the prescribed motions. Jake introduced combat sequences with the same progression methodology he had used for physical conditioning. Simple strikes and blocks came first, repeated until they became automatic responses. Only then did he add complexity through combination movements and tactical variations. "Combat isn't about strength or speed," he explained during one particularly intense session. "It's about making better decisions faster than your opponent." Elena paused mid-strike, considering the implications of his statement. Her royal education had emphasized command authority and strategic thinking, but always from a position of protected leadership. This training was preparing her for personal combat, where wrong decisions meant immediate death. "How do I learn to make those decisions?" she asked. Jake smiled for the first time since her training began. "By making mistakes here where they're not fatal." He began introducing unpredictable elements into their practice sessions, sudden changes in tempo, unexpected attack patterns, and environmental obstacles that forced Elena to adapt her techniques in real time. Each challenge pushed her beyond comfortable routine into the chaos where actual combat lived. Elena's improvement accelerated as Jake increased the training intensity. Her body responded to the progressive overload with strength gains that amazed her. More importantly, her confidence returned as she mastered increasingly complex techniques. The helpless captive was transforming into someone capable of fighting for what she valued. "Time to test your progress," Jake announced after a particularly successful session. "Tomorrow we spar." Elena felt her heart rate spike with anticipation and nervousness. Everything she had learned would face evaluation against Jake's superior skill and experience. The prospect both excited and terrified her in ways that surprised her with their intensity. "Will you hold back because I'm still learning?" she asked. Jake's expression became serious as he considered her question. "I'll use enough skill to challenge you without overwhelming you completely. The goal is growth, not humiliation." Elena nodded her understanding while privately hoping she could surprise him with her progress. 3 weeks of intensive training had rebuilt her strength and taught her fundamental techniques. Tomorrow would reveal whether that foundation could support the advanced skills she would need to reclaim her empire. 6 months of relentless training had transformed Elena into someone Jake barely recognized from the broken prisoner he had purchased at auction. Her movements flowed with deadly grace as she worked through advanced combat sequences, her blades singing through complex patterns that would have seemed impossible during those first awkward weeks. "Again," Jake commanded as Elena completed a particularly challenging combination. "This time, faster." Elena reset her stance without complaint, though sweat now beaded on her forehead and her breathing had deepened. The combination required perfect timing and coordination between footwork, blade work, and defensive positioning. Her 6th repetition achieved the smooth efficiency Jake demanded. Better. His praise came rarely these days, making each positive assessment feel earned rather than encouraging. Now adapt it for close quarters. The request pushed Elena into problem-solving mode as she analyzed how to modify the sequence for confined spaces. Her tactical thinking had sharpened alongside her physical abilities, transforming her from someone who followed choreographed patterns into someone who could improvise solutions under pressure. She demonstrated her adaptation with confidence that spoke of deep understanding rather than mere memorization. Jake nodded approvingly as she explained the reasoning behind each modification. Teaching her to think like a warrior had proven as important as building her physical capabilities. Time for full contact sparring, Jake announced, reaching for protective gear. Elena felt her pulse quicken with anticipation. Their sparring sessions had progressed from careful drilling to increasingly realistic combat simulation. Today would mark the first time Jake would fight her without holding back significant portions of his ability. They faced each other across the training mat with weapons drawn and protective equipment secured. Elena studied Jake's stance with analytical precision, noting subtle changes in his positioning that suggested he was taking her more seriously as an opponent than ever before. "Begin," Jake called. Elena attacked immediately with a combination she had perfected through countless repetitions. Jake deflected her strikes with minimal movement, his economy of motion making her efforts look wasteful by comparison. But his counterattacks came faster and with more force than she had experienced previously. The pace intensified rapidly as both fighters settled into serious engagement. Elena found herself pushed to her absolute limits, forced to utilize every technique and tactic she had learned just to avoid being overwhelmed. Jake's superior experience showed in his ability to control distance and timing while maintaining constant pressure. But Elena began to find openings in his defenses that hadn't existed during earlier sparring sessions. Her improvement had reached a level where she could occasionally surprise him with innovative applications of taught techniques. The realization thrilled her even as she fought to capitalize on momentary advantages. "Excellent adaptation," Jake said as they reset after a particularly intense exchange. "You're thinking independently now instead of just following patterns." Elena smiled despite her exhaustion. The praise meant more coming from someone who had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she possessed. She was becoming the warrior her empire needed, someone capable of facing the forces that had destroyed her people. "Am I ready?" she asked. Jay considered the question seriously as he studied her performance over the past months. She had exceeded every expectation he had set during those early training sessions. Her determination and natural talent had combined with systematic instruction to produce capabilities that impressed him, despite his experience with elite soldiers. "You're ready to begin the real fight," he said finally. "But remember, training in controlled conditions differs from life or death combat. Stay alert, trust your instruction, and never stop learning." Elena nodded her understanding while privately feeling pride in how far she had come. The scared princess who had been dragged onto that auction block no longer existed. In her place stood someone prepared to reclaim her birthright through strength and skill rather than inherited authority. "When do we leave for the Celestian systems?" she asked. Jake's expression became grim as he considered the challenges ahead. "Tomorrow. Intel suggests your enemies are consolidating power faster than expected. If we wait much longer, they'll be too entrenched to remove." Elena felt her heart rate spike with anticipation that combined excitement and terror in equal measure. Everything she had worked toward for 6 months would soon face the ultimate test. Success meant restoring her empire and saving her people. Failure meant death for both her and the man who had risked everything to give her this chance. The starport buzzed with activity as Jake and Elena made their way toward the departure terminal. She wore simple traveler's clothing that concealed the weapons Jake had selected for their mission, but her bearing remained unmistakably regal despite attempts to blend into the crowd. 6 months of training had restored her confidence along with her physical capabilities. "Remember, we're just another pair of traders heading to the outer colonies," Jake murmured as they approached the security checkpoint. "Nothing special about us." Ella nodded while consciously adjusting her posture to appear less commanding. The habit of authority died hard, especially when facing the prospect of returning to her home system for the first time since her capture. Every instinct screamed at her to stand tall and demand the respect owed to her birthright. Their ship waited at Docking Bay 7, a modest cargo hauler that showed signs of honest wear without appearing desperate or suspicious. Jake had chosen the vessel specifically for its ability to blend into commercial traffic while maintaining sufficient speed and armament for emergency situations. "Nice ship," Elena observed as they climbed aboard. "Functional ship," Jake corrected. "Pretty ships attract attention we don't want." The interior proved more impressive than the exterior suggested. While maintaining the appearance of a working cargo vessel, Jake had installed enhanced navigation systems, improved defensive capabilities, and communication equipment that would allow them to coordinate with any surviving resistance elements in Celestian space. Elena settled into the co-pilot seat as Jake initiated launch procedures. The familiar routine of pre-flight checks and system diagnostics calmed her nerves while building anticipation for what lay ahead. She had spent months preparing for this moment, but now the abstract concept of returning home became immediate reality. "Nervous?" Jake asked, as the ship lifted away from the planet's surface. "Terrified," Elena admitted, "but not of the fighting. I'm afraid of what we might find when we arrive." Jake understood her concern without further explanation. Intelligence reports from Celestian space painted a grim picture of systematic oppression and cultural destruction. The enemies who had conquered her empire weren't content with political control. They were attempting to erase every trace of Celestian civilization. "Whatever we find, we'll deal with it together," he said. The promise carried weight that went beyond mere reassurance. Jake had already proven his commitment by spending his fortune and risking his life for her freedom. Now he was voluntarily entering a war zone where his human heritage would make him as much a target as her royal blood. Their ship jumped to hyperspace with a subtle shudder that marked the beginning of their journey into danger. Elena stared out at the swirling energy patterns of faster-than-light travel while contemplating how much her life had changed since that terrible day at the slave auction. "What happens if we succeed?" she asked. "What happens to us after I reclaim my throne?" Jake considered her question carefully. The relationship between them had evolved beyond simple instructor and student into something neither had expected. But the practical realities of their different origins and obligations couldn't be ignored indefinitely. "That depends on what kind of ruler you choose to become," he said finally. Aelin understood the deeper implications of his response. A traditional Celestian monarch would have little place for a human advisor, regardless of his contributions to her restoration. But she was no longer the same person who had inherited a throne through bloodline alone. Her trials had taught her to value character over pedigree. "And if I choose to become the kind of ruler who remembers her friends?" she pressed. Jake smiled slightly as he monitored their progress through hyperspace. "Then maybe we'll have a chance to find out what peace looks like." The remainder of their journey passed in careful preparation and quiet conversation. Elena reviewed intelligence reports on enemy force dispositions while Jake maintained their ship and planned tactical approaches to various scenarios they might encounter. Both understood that success would require not just individual skill but effective coordination between them. As they approached the Celestian border, Elena felt her destiny calling with intensity that made her earlier determination seem pale by comparison. Everything she had lost waited ahead, along with the chance to prove that royal blood meant more than inherited privilege. She was ready to fight for her people and the man who had made her transformation possible. The edge of Celestian space looked exactly as Elena remembered, yet everything had changed in ways that broke her heart. Enemy patrol ships moved through shipping lanes that once carried the wealth of her empire. Military checkpoints controlled access to systems where her people had lived in freedom for centuries. 3 patrol vessels ahead, Jake reported, studying sensor readings with professional calm. Standard configuration, but they're running active scans on all traffic. Elena leaned forward to examine the displays showing their approach to the first checkpoint. The enemy ships bore the insignia of the Dominion fleet, the same forces that had conquered her homeworld and scattered her royal family. Seeing their symbols in space that belonged to her people ignited rage she struggled to control. "Can we fight past them?" she asked. "Not without alerting every enemy ship in the system." Jake adjusted their trajectory to appear like normal merchant traffic. "Better to blend in and gather intelligence before making our move." Elena forced herself to accept his tactical judgment despite every instinct demanding immediate action. The disciplined patience he had taught her during training now faced its greatest test as they approached the beings responsible for her people's suffering. The lead patrol ship hailed them with crisp Dominion military protocol. Jake responded with the carefully prepared cover story they had rehearsed during their journey. Elena remained silent but ready, her hand resting near the concealed weapons that might mean the difference between success and capture. "Cargo vessel, prepare for inspection," the enemy commander ordered. Jake acknowledged the instruction while subtly activating their ship's enhanced defensive systems. If their cover failed, they would need every advantage available to fight their way clear. Elena felt her heart rate spike as an enemy boarding shuttle approached their docking port. "Stay calm," Jake murmured. "Let them see what they expect to see." 2 Dominion soldiers entered their ship with weapons ready and expressions of bored efficiency. Elena kept her eyes downcast and her posture submissive, playing the role of a cowed civilian despite every fiber of her being screaming for vengeance against these invaders. The inspection proceeded with routine thoroughness that spoke of countless similar encounters. The soldiers examined their cargo manifest and scanned their false identification documents without apparent suspicion. Elena's royal training in diplomatic deception served her well as she maintained her harmless merchant persona. "Everything appears in order," the lead soldier announced after completing their search. "Proceed to designated shipping lanes and maintain standard communication protocols." The enemy troops departed without incident, leaving Elena and Jake alone with the knowledge that they had successfully penetrated the outer defenses of occupied Celestian space. But Elena felt no satisfaction in the small victory, only growing determination to make the invaders pay for what they had done to her empire. "First phase complete," Jake observed as they moved deeper into the system. "Now we find the resistance and assess what kind of support structure remains." Elena nodded while studying updated intelligence displays that showed the scope of enemy occupation. Dozens of installations that had once served her government now flew Dominion colors. The systematic replacement of Celestian authority with enemy control ran deeper than she had imagined possible, but scattered signals suggested that not all her people had submitted to conquest. Hidden communication frequencies carried coded messages that spoke of continued resistance and hope for eventual liberation. Her empire might be wounded, but it still lived in the hearts of those who refused to accept defeat. "There!" Elena pointed to a signal pattern she recognized from royal communication protocols. "That frequency belongs to Admiral Chen's fleet command. She must still be fighting." Jake plotted an intercept course that would allow them to make contact with the resistance forces while avoiding enemy patrol routes. Elena felt hope rising for the first time since entering Celestian space. If Admiral Chen still commanded loyal forces, their mission had genuine prospects for success. The resistance base occupied a hollowed asteroid in a neglected mining system, its location chosen for concealment rather than comfort. Elena's heart swelled as she recognized the improvised facilities where her people continued fighting against impossible odds. Every piece of equipment and every determined face represented refusal to accept the destruction of everything she valued. Admiral Chen emerged from the command center as their ship docked, her uniform worn but impeccably maintained despite months of guerrilla warfare. Elena stepped forward with a mixture of relief and sorrow as she faced one of her most trusted military commanders for the first time since the fall of her capital. "Your Majesty." Admiral Chen's salute carried emotion that transcended military protocol. "We never stopped believing you would return." Elena embraced the older woman briefly before stepping back to maintain appropriate dignity. Around them, resistance fighters gathered to witness their reunion with expressions ranging from joy to cautious hope. Many bore scars from battles fought in her name during the dark months of occupation. "What's our situation?" Aelin asked, falling immediately into the command presence Jake's training had helped her develop. Admiral Chen led them to a tactical display showing enemy force distributions throughout Celestian space. The scope of occupation was even worse than intelligence reports had suggested, with Dominion forces controlling every major population center and industrial facility. "We have 11 ships remaining from the original fleet," Chen reported, plus approximately 3,000 ground forces scattered across 4 systems. Enemy strength is estimated at 47 capital ships with supporting elements. Elena studied the numbers with growing understanding of the challenge they faced. Even with her newfound combat skills and Jake's tactical expertise, liberating her empire would require more than personal valor. They needed strategy, coordination, and probably a significant amount of luck. "What about popular support?" Jake asked, his military experience recognizing the critical importance of civilian backing for any successful resistance movement. "Strong in rural areas, suppressed in major cities," Chen answered. "The enemy has been efficient in controlling population centers, but resistance cells remain active throughout the outer colonies." Elena felt determination crystallizing into practical planning as she absorbed the tactical situation. Her training had prepared her for personal combat, but reclaiming an empire would require leadership skills that went beyond individual prowess. She needed to become the symbol her people could rally behind. "We start with a demonstration," she announced, "something that proves the royal line survives and fights back." Admiral Chen smiled for the first time since their reunion. "What did you have in mind, Your Majesty?" Elena looked at Jake, seeing reflected in his eyes the confidence she had built over months of intensive preparation. Together they would plan the first strike in a campaign to restore her birthright and free her people from oppression. The assault on Outpost 7 began at dawn, 3 weeks after Elena's arrival at the resistance base. She moved through the facility's corridors with deadly efficiency, her blade work displaying the perfection Jake's training had instilled. Enemy soldiers fell before her advance as she carved a path toward the installation's command center. Jake flanked through parallel passages, his tactical coordination with Elena seamless despite the chaos of combat. Their months of training together had created an almost telepathic understanding of each other's methods and timing. Where Elena brought royal authority backed by lethal skill, Jake provided professional military expertise in covering fire. "Command center secured," Elena reported through her comm device as the last Dominion officer surrendered rather than face her blade. "Broadcasting liberation message now." Her words echoed across Celestian space as resistance cells transmitted her declaration of renewed royal authority. The message carried more than political rhetoric. It demonstrated that their princess had returned as a warrior, capable of fighting for what belonged to her people. The enemy response came swiftly and brutally. Dominion forces converged on the region with overwhelming strength, forcing Elena and the resistance to abandon their positions and fade back into the asteroid fields where superior numbers couldn't be brought to bear effectively. But the damage to enemy morale had been inflicted. Reports filtered in of increased resistance activity throughout occupied space as Elena's people gained hope from proof that organized opposition still existed. Her symbolic victory had achieved its intended purpose despite the tactical withdrawal. "Phase 2, Admiral Chen announced during their next planning session. "We've gotten their attention. Now we make them pay for dividing their forces to hunt us." Elena studied the tactical displays showing enemy fleet movements as Dominion commanders struggled to protect their installations while pursuing the resistance. Absolute danger. Their response patterns revealed weaknesses that could be exploited by someone willing to take calculated risks. "Here," she pointed to a supply convoy route that connected several enemy bases. "If we hit their logistics repeatedly, we force them to dedicate combat vessels to escort duty." Jake nodded approvingly at her tactical analysis. Months of strategic discussion during training had developed her ability to think beyond individual combat to the larger chess game of warfare. She was becoming not just a skilled fighter, but a capable military commander. The convoy raid succeeded beyond their most optimistic projections. Elena led boarding actions with precision that left enemy crews demoralized, while resistance forces captured desperately needed supplies. Each success built momentum and attracted new volunteers to their cause. But victory came with costs that weighed heavily on Elena's conscience. Every battle meant casualties among people fighting in her name. Brave souls who died believing in her ability to restore their freedom. The responsibility of command proved more challenging than any physical training Jake had put her through. "This is what leadership means," Jake said quietly as they reviewed casualty reports from their latest engagement. "Knowing that people trust you enough to die for what you represent." Elena stared out at the starfield where her empire had once stretched across dozens of systems. Each point of light represented worlds where her people endured occupation while hoping for liberation she might not be able to deliver. The weight of their faith pressed down on her with intensity that made combat seem simple by comparison. How do I live with the knowledge that my choices determine whether they live or die? She asked. By making choices worth their sacrifice, Jake answered, and by never forgetting that freedom can't be given. It has to be won. Elena straightened her shoulders as she accepted the burden of command. Her training had made her capable of fighting for her throne, but the struggle had taught her what wearing a crown truly meant. She would lead her people to liberation or die trying, because anything less would betray the trust they had placed in her. The final battle came sooner than anyone expected. Dominion intelligence had successfully tracked the resistance base despite all precautions, forcing Elena and her forces into a desperate defense against overwhelming odds. She stood in the command center watching enemy fleet formations converge on their position with surgical precision. 43 capital ships, Admiral Chen reported grimly. Full invasion force with ground support elements. They intend to end this once and for all. Elena felt strange calm settle over her as she faced the moment that would determine her people's fate. Everything Jake had taught her about combat and leadership now faced ultimate testing against odds that logic said were impossible to overcome. Then we give them a fight they'll never forget, she announced to the assembled resistance commanders. Every ship, every fighter, everything we have. Today we prove that Celestian courage means more than Dominion numbers. The space battle that followed became legend among her people. Elena commanded from the flagship bridge with tactical brilliance that surprised even Admiral Chen. Her months of training had developed not just individual skill but strategic thinking that outmaneuvered enemy formations despite their numerical superiority. Jake led boarding actions against enemy capital ships with teams of volunteers who followed him into impossible situations because they trusted his competence and Elena's cause. His human heritage became an advantage as confused Dominion crews struggled to understand why members of a supposedly inferior species fought with such devastating effectiveness. The turning point came when Elena personally led an assault against the enemy command vessel. Her blade work carved through elite Dominion guards while Jake provided tactical support that allowed her to reach the bridge where enemy leadership coordinated their invasion. Surrender your forces and withdraw from Celestian space, she commanded the enemy admiral while her blade rested at his throat. Or watch them die uselessly for a cause that's already lost. The Dominion commander's surrender ended the battle and began negotiations that would restore Elena's throne through strength rather than birthright. Her people had won their freedom by proving they possessed the courage and skill to defend it against any enemy who threatened their independence. As Elena stood on the bridge of her reclaimed flagship, Jake beside her and her empire's flags flying once again over free space, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from broken captive to victorious queen. The crown meant more now because she had earned it through sacrifice and determination rather than inheriting it through accident of birth. What happens now? Jake asked as they watched Dominion ships retreat toward the border. Elena smiled as she considered future possibilities that seemed impossibly bright compared to the darkness she had emerged from. Now we build something better than what we had before. Something worth the price we paid to reclaim it. Her empire would rise again, stronger and wiser because of the trials that had tested its people's resolve. And at her side would stand the man who had given her the chance to become worthy of the crown she would wear with honor for the rest of her life.